and welcome back to my channel. In this video, I want to review this book here called The Art of Weeing in the Sink, which is quite a funny title. The Art of Weeing in the Sink by Richie Smith. It's a sort of like autobiography memoir, as it says on the front, the heartbreaking, comical and inspirational story of a boy learning to live with autism. I just love the picture on the front. And as it says on the back, The Art of Weeing in a Sink is a heartbreakingly honest account of a boy's life as he grows up with undiagnosed autism in the northeast of England. Richie overcomes huge challenges presented by the ignorance of his condition and ultimately emerges triumphant. This poignant and optimistic book is an essential read for anyone caring for children with autism. I got this book off Amazon. It was like an easy read. I mean, you could probably read it in one sitting. I think it took me about 2 sittings, but again, I am a slow reader. And it's really about Richie's life growing up with undiagnosed autism. So he was born in the northeast of England, and he was diagnosed in adulthood, age 34. And the reason why the book's called The Art of Weeing in a Sink is that when he was aged around sort of like 10 or 11 years old, he used to wee in a sink. He did this because he loved patterns. He loved the patterns that it made and the way the sunlight brought out the colours in the wee. And he got told off by his adoptive parents for this, which left scars because he ended up feeling worthless, because for him, weeing in a sink was a sort of like harmless activity. He sort of like as he jokes in the book, but you have to sort of like suffer for your art, as it were. But yeah, for him it was, a harmless activity. And there's actually a poem that was written at the back of the book for Richie from Peter. Peter is the editor of the book, Peter Barron. And it says, I'll just read it out to you because I thought it's a good poem. As the sun shines through the window, my kaleidoscope of gold is lighting up the liquid as it swirls around the bowl. Dancing clockwise in slow motion, the magic's been released, and down my secret waterfall, at last I'll find some peace. To you it's just disgusting, so I'll always feel the pain from the way you made me feel when I left a yellow stain. It's the ignorance of difference that sets our worlds apart. To me, you see, it's beautiful, a glittering work of art. I just thought that was quite a nice poem. So he was a little bit of his backstory again. So he was adopted at the age of 3, but it didn't really work out for him, as he said as his adoptive parents, because he wasn't diagnosed with autism growing up, his adoptive parents didn't really understand him and like his quirks and the things he did, such as weeing in a sink. They didn't understand the reasons for this behaviour, and they would often say things such as that they wished they'd never adopted him, which kind of left sort of like psychological marks on him, although he says he can forgive them because they didn't understand that he was autistic, and if they did have that understanding, maybe they would have understood the reasons for his behaviour more. But it's kind of like a sort of a rags to riches story in a way, because he had quite a difficult time, but he kind of later on redeemed himself and became a dad himself. He's actually adopted 2 kids, and he now runs his own business, as I get on to later on in this review. So it is kind of like a success story. And beginning with the fact he was adopted in the first place was because he was abused as a baby by his father. So he had quite a difficult start. He talks about how on page 21 his difficulties at primary school, but the signs were not picked up, as indeed that's very common for quite a few people with autism. He found it hard to make friends, so one of the things he would do is he would buy crisps, throw them on the floor, then eat them in a hope that kids would find him amusing and like him. So he did some quite kind of like degrading things just to try and, in a sort of like a desperate uh, kind of plea to get kids to notice him, which I can relate to myself, because I did some rather inappropriate things to try and get kids to notice me. For example, when I was in year 4 at primary school, so sort of like I would have been about sort of like 8 years old, I would wet myself in class, which is it is quite disgusting when you think about it, but I didn't have any shame. And to me, I just found it hilariously silly, hilariously funny. I guess similar to the kind of like weeing in a sink thing. To me, it was just, to me it was just a funny thing to do, and I didn't have any sense of it being inappropriate, because I guess like most kids at that age, sort of like age of like 8 to 9 years old, would have started to develop a kind of like a basic sense of shame. So I would literally just be wetting myself in class. It's quite funny now looking back on it, because with the benefit of hindsight. So my skirt would literally be dripping, and I would be sitting there and I would be finding it hilariously funny, like like a damp patches on the plastic chair. Like moving around on the chair and creating damp patches, and then the kids would be like, "Oh, that's disgusting," and I remember standing in the lunch queue and my skirt was just like dripping, and I just didn't have any shame whatsoever. But that was my way of kind of like getting kids to notice me. So similar to his attempt to make friends, but in a rather kind of like inappropriate way. And in Richie's case, as I said, he would buy crisps and throw them on the floor and then eat them. So kind of similar kind of way of desperately trying to get attention, get noticed. Because if you don't know how else to make friends, what are you supposed to do? And as I said in a previous video, another example of that was when I was at secondary school and I told everyone I'd slept with a dog, which was another attempt which then got me into trouble because people took it seriously when for me it was just a joke. So I could be quite inappropriate. I can relate to that. Again, on page 21, which he talks about how he struggled academically at school, which is relatable to me because I struggled academically because, with various aspects of learning, but he also had some sort of specific learning difficulties. In his case, with English. In my case, I struggled with all areas of the curriculum, but for me it was mainly particularly maths and comprehension. I particularly struggled with comprehension when I was at school. So he was given sort of special one-to-one help, which also happened to me. I had teaching assistants and stuff. It didn't really help me because it didn't really provide me with the actual support I needed, and it wasn't enough. But obviously, because you then are kind of like labelled to say having like special needs, essentially, it can then obviously, as Witchy says, it knocks your confidence. It sort of sets you apart from the other kids, particularly when you're not. I mean, in my case, I was just, I knew that I had special needs, which is actually a label that sticks and it carries its own stigma. Personally, I don't actually like that label. I think it is quite a stigmatising label, and particularly when you don't know the reasons for it, and when you're sort of like separated out from other kids and made out like you have issues, which you do have issues, but it's the way they dealt with it. I just don't think it's very good, because it kind of does result in you feeling like you aren't the same as others, that you're not up to scratch, and obviously that does affect your self-esteem, particularly when you're struggling with making friends and all the other things on top of that. At a very kind of like impressionable age when it can hurt, and that stays with you for life, I think. So he talks about some of the other issues he had growing up that got him into trouble. For example, on page 22, he often got told off at home for leaving his bedroom untidy, etc. The same as me, very untidy. There's that stereotype, isn't there, that people with autism are really tidy and organised, and seriously, it's not always the case. It can be in isolated areas, but it can also be a lot of mess, so I could relate to that. And also, when obviously he was caught weeing in a sink, he because a yellow stain had formed, his dad, his adoptive dad, told him that he was a disgusting human being, which again stuck and resulted in low self-esteem for him. And he, as I say, he didn't know he was autistic, and neither did he, so he said it was down to ignorance. So he then internalised that and felt that he was odd and disgusting, as that he was always called by parents. And yeah, I can relate to that because like some of my behaviour was like very kind of strange growing up, because in acting differently to other kids, obviously then you then get you get called all sorts of things, and it does stick, particularly when you're very impressionable and it just stays in your head, and it's like sediment. It kind of builds up and it builds up, and it does have the end result of low self-esteem. So I can relate to that too. He also talks about how he would wet himself at night, but he was scared of being found out, so he just lay in his urine thinking thinking that his body heat would dry the sheet, and he hid his underwear down the back of the bed. He's very, very honest in this book, searingly honest, but I think that's very good that he is so candid. And yeah, I can relate to that as well because I don't mind admitting this. I mean, it's in the past now. I wet my bed as well as a teenager, a lot older than like normal, and basically so as not to get told off, because I was told off for going to the toilet too many times in the night. I would get told off for it. Because for disturbing other people's sleep. So I would basically then just wet myself in the bed because I didn't want to get told off. Obviously I still got told off because my parents would notice, but I was kind of like, it's kind of like blindsight. You kind of, it's like in that moment in time, I wasn't thinking, oh, like they're going to notice sort of thing. I kind of didn't put two and two together. I didn't like connect the dots. So I didn't realise I was actually going to get myself into far more trouble. And also, of course, it's, well, I guess, again, that's just another thing that kind of set me apart. It's kind of like different, because I guess most teenagers would kind of have more kind of sense of shame and modesty. Like, they wouldn't wet themselves, they wouldn't wet the bed, but I did. And yeah, so I can relate to that as well. So it's interesting he did the same. That he did that so that he wouldn't get into trouble, because he was scared of being found out. So yeah, I can relate to that. And I think these things aren't often talked about because, they carry kind of a lot of shame, I guess, and like we don't tend to talk about them. But these things do happen, and yeah, just another thing about being autistic that kind of, doesn't get talked about that often, but does happen. So I can relate to that. And I think, it does come down just to the fact that you don't really have a kind of social kind of, sense of appropriateness, I guess, that like most kind of kids have. I mean, I don't do that anymore, but that's what I mean. I don't mind talking about it. It's in the past now. So, and consequently, of course, like he got called an animal and stuff. He got called dirty, and I've been called those things in the past as well, just because of these like ways of behaving. And like I say, they do lower your self-esteem. And then also what I find what happens is that later on in your life, when you no longer do these things, you still feel like contaminated by what you did in the past. Don't know if any of you can relate, but some of the things I did in the past, I can now look back and I think, oh my god, that was really inappropriate, that was really kind of like shameful what I did. And obviously like now, I wouldn't do those things because I've developed and I've matured and I understand things more. But because I did those things back in the past, it kind of like feels like a kind of like a dirty stigma on me. I don't know if any of you can relate. I think it's quite good to talk about these things because, like I say, like I think keeping them secret kind of adds to the stigma, and I'm sure like many people have done things in the past that they feel ashamed of, and I think it is quite good to talk about it. But let me know in the box below if you can relate to any of what I've said, because I'll be interested to know. Okay, so I'm going to move on to video number 2 now to carry on reviewing this book. So moving on to video number 2 now.